Most people, when they hear the name Alec Baldwin, think of scandals, feuds, courtroom drama, headlines that just won't quit. But behind all of that noise, something else was happening. Alec was quietly building one of the biggest, most talked about families in Hollywood. 8 children, 2 very different mothers, and a story that's equal parts complicated, heartbreaking, and surprisingly human. You think you know this family from the headlines, but the headlines have only ever told you half the story. So what really happened to Alec Baldwin's 8 kids? Let's go back to the beginning. The name you probably know first is Ireland. She's his eldest, born in 1995 with actress Kim Basinger, and she became famous before she ever had a chance to introduce herself. In 2007, a voicemail Alec left for her leaked to the public. He called her a rude, thoughtless little pig and threatened to straighten her out. Ireland was 12 years old. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Tabloids went wild. The already messy custody battle between Alec and Kim got even uglier. And Ireland, a child, was suddenly a storyline instead of a person. Outlets replayed that voicemail on loop. Commentators debated whether Alec was a bad father. Ireland was dissected and discussed as if she were a character in a TV show, not a real kid going through something genuinely traumatic. She wasn't allowed to just be a daughter. She was a headline. But here's what makes her story different from what you'd expect. She didn't disappear. She didn't stay quiet. She didn't become a cautionary tale. Ireland grew up, launched a modeling career, and became one of the most candid voices on social media about mental health, body image, and what it actually feels like to grow up famous entirely by accident, just because of whose daughter you are. She claps back when she's misrepresented. She clarifies when the press twists her words. She doesn't let other people write her story for her. That's not a personality trait. That's a survival skill, developed in real time, under enormous pressure, with very little grace extended to her. She figured it out publicly, without a roadmap, without the tools her younger siblings will eventually have. And she did it on her own terms. But something happened in 2023 that shifted the way she talked about all of it. Ireland became a mother herself. Her daughter Holland arrived, and with that came a new kind of reflection, more generous about the past in some ways, more fiercely protective about the future. She was open about wanting something different for her own child. Specifically, a lot more privacy than she herself had ever been afforded. Her relationship with Alec has never been simple. Some moments of public defense, some of public distance. Never fully repaired. Never fully broken. Just real. And that might be the most honest depiction of a complicated parent-child relationship anyone in Hollywood has ever put on display. She's 30 now, she's a mother, and she's still carving out her life, modeling, advocating, and refusing to let the messiness of her past define her ceiling. Ireland is probably the most compelling figure in this entire story, because she's had the longest time to reckon with what being Alec Baldwin's child actually means. But she's also only one piece of it. Because after the dust settled on that first family, Alec started building another one. And that's where things get even more complicated. Enter Hilaria Baldwin. And before you can understand the 7 children she shares with Alec, you have to understand the controversy that surrounds her, because it colors everything that follows. Hilaria was born Hilary Lynn Hayward Thomas in Boston, Massachusetts, to 2 American parents. She grew up in Massachusetts. She attended schools in America. By every measurable account, she is an American woman. But for years, in interviews, on social media, in public appearances, she presented herself as Spanish. She spoke with an accent that came and went depending on who was asking. She talked about growing up in Mallorca. She implied, repeatedly and in multiple settings, that Spain was home. People found it charming. It became part of her public identity. And then in 2020, people started asking questions. And when journalists actually dug in, the whole persona came apart almost immediately. The accent wasn't consistent. The timeline didn't add up. The story kept shifting. The internet had a field day. Hilaria was mocked widely. The story became a national case study in the kind of identity performance that social media enables and rewards, and it raised some uncomfortable questions about authenticity, privilege, and what it means to borrow a culture that isn't yours. She apologized, sort of. She reframed the narrative, sort of. And then she just kept going. Which, in a strange way, is the most Baldwin thing imaginable. But here's why this matters beyond the punchline. because the children growing up in that household absorbed all of it. Which brings us to Carmen. Carmen is the first child born to Alec and Hilaria, arriving in 2013, making her the eldest of what would eventually become a very large second family. She's 12 now, and she's grown up front and center in her mother's social media world. Featured in posts almost from the moment she arrived, photographed regularly, held up as part of a very public, very curated family brand. And she didn't choose any of that. Child development experts have grown increasingly vocal about the ethics of raising children in the social media spotlight, the long-term impact on identity, on privacy, on a child's ability to develop a sense of self outside of public performance. Carmen is exactly the kind of case they're talking about. Every milestone, every off day, every awkward phase has existed in some form online. That's a specific kind of childhood. Not necessarily a bad one, but a complicated one. And here's the part that doesn't get said enough. Carmen is also the one who will set the template for how the younger Baldwin siblings relate to public life. She's the oldest of Hilaria's children. She's the one the others will watch. Whether she embraces it, retreats from it, or finds some middle ground, her path is going to influence theirs. That's a lot to carry at 12. And the lineup behind her is long. After Carmen came Raphael in 2015, Leonardo in 2016, Romeo in 2018, and Eduardo in 2020. 5 children in 7 years. By the time Eduardo arrived, Alec was already in his mid-50s. That pace attracted a lot of commentary, some admiring, some genuinely skeptical. But beyond the optics, there's something more specific worth sitting with. By the time Raphael finishes high school, Alec Baldwin will be well into his 70s. That's not a tabloid detail. That's a reality that shapes a childhood in ways that don't show up in curated family photos. What does it mean to grow up as Alec Baldwin's kid when Alec Baldwin is slowing down? What does it mean to need your father fully present when he's simultaneously one of the most famous men in America and someone who, by his own admission, is thinking about stepping back? That's a particular kind of emotional weight. Not financial pressure. Not social pressure. Just the quiet, daily weight of a father who is also a legend, also a controversy, also aging, all at the same time. None of these boys have a distinct public narrative yet. Raphael is 10, Leonardo 9, Romeo 8, Eduardo 5. They appear in photos. They feature in the chaotic, warm family content Hilaria posts. They were very much present during the pandemic, when the Baldwins were one of those celebrity families who documented quarantine life with unusual intimacy, giving audiences a surprisingly real look at what it's like to manage 4 young boys in a lockdown. But they haven't become characters in the public story the way Ireland has. Not yet. The thing is, though, they don't have to do anything to have a public footprint. It was built for them before they were old enough to have an opinion about it. How they'll feel about that when they're teenagers, when they can search their own names and see years of content they never consented to, that's still an open question. But some celebrity kids their age have already started answering it, and the answers haven't always been comfortable. And then came the final 2. And their story is tied to the darkest chapter this entire family has ever lived through. So what happened when everything fell apart? Maria Lucia Victoria arrived in March 2021. Eloria Catalina Irina followed in September 2022. And between those 2 births, everything changed, not just for Alec Baldwin, but for every single person connected to his name. In October 2021, on the New Mexico set of the film Rust, a gun Alec Baldwin was holding discharged during a rehearsal. Cinematographer Helena Hutchins was struck and killed. Director Joel Souza was wounded. The tragedy sent shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond, and immediately cast a long, dark shadow over the entire Baldwin family, one that hasn't fully lifted since. What followed was years of legal proceedings, public debate about on-set safety protocols, a media cycle that was relentless in its coverage, and a case that ping-ponged through the court system in ways that were difficult to follow even for those paying close attention. Charges were filed. They were dropped. They were refiled. Alec maintained throughout that he did not pull the trigger, that the gun discharged when he cocked it during the rehearsal. Investigators and firearms experts debated the mechanics. The public debated everything else. In July 2024, Alec's involuntary manslaughter charges were dismissed with prejudice, meaning they cannot be brought against him again in connection with the shooting. The ruling cited prosecutorial misconduct related to the withholding of evidence. It was a legal vindication, of a kind. But it didn't erase what happened on that set. It didn't bring Helena Hutchins back. And it didn't end the conversation about what Alec Baldwin is responsible for, legally or otherwise. What it did do was close a specific chapter in a story that had consumed years of this family's life. And the youngest Baldwin children lived through all of it without fully understanding any of it. Maria Lucia arrived into a household still adjusting to pandemic life and 6 other siblings. Aloria arrived into a household actively navigating one of the most high-profile criminal cases in Hollywood history. These are the 2 most protected of all the Baldwin children, kept out of the spotlight as much as possible, rarely featured individually, shielded in ways that Carmen and the boys weren't always shielded. Maybe because by the time they arrived, Hilaria and Alec had learned something painful about what exposure costs when life goes sideways. Alec himself has spoken publicly about the aftermath of Rust in terms that are striking. He said his children saved his life. That being a father to this many people who needed him gave him a reason to push through when the pressure was at its most crushing. That's not a throwaway line. That's someone telling you that the weight of parenthood, the sheer number of people depending on him, was what kept him standing when everything else was falling. That's a heavy thing to be for your parents. And these 2 youngest kids are carrying it without even knowing it yet. But here's what happens when you pull back and look at all 8 of them together. Alec Baldwin has said he wants to fight, to show his children that you don't roll over when life knocks you down, that you stay hopeful, that you take back power from the people who try to take it from you. He's also acknowledged, in classic Baldwin fashion, that part of the reason he wants tough, resilient kids is entirely selfish. He's going to need them when he's old. It's a rare moment of genuine self-awareness from a man who hasn't always had the best track record with it. And it gets at something real about what this family is actually built on. Because here's the thing about being a Baldwin. It has never, not once, been a neutral thing. The name comes with fame, with access, with a certain credibility that opens doors before you've even knocked. But it also comes with the voicemails and the courtrooms and the identity scandals and the tragedy on a film set in New Mexico. It comes with a father who was one of the defining comedic forces of his generation, whose Jack Donnery on 30 Rock made him a legend, whose Trump impression on Saturday Night Live became one of the defining pop culture moments of an entire presidency, who has been nominated for more Emmy Awards than almost anyone in television history. That version of Alec Baldwin exists in real, unresolved tension with the man at the center of a manslaughter case. With the man who left that voicemail. With the man whose wife's accent became a national punchline. His children are inheriting every single version of him. Every headline. Every take. Every moment of genuine brilliance and genuine failure. That's a complicated inheritance. And each of them will have to reckon with it eventually, on their own timeline, in their own way. Ireland has already shown one version of how that reckoning can go. You survive the chaos. You call it out when you need to. You build something real anyway. It took time, and it clearly wasn't painless. But she did it. She's 30, she's a mother, and she's still standing, loudly and publicly and on her own terms. Carmen is on the edge of her teenage years, about to enter the part of life where identity stops being something your parents hand you and starts being something you have to figure out for yourself. Raphael, Leonardo, Romeo, and Eduardo are young enough that their stories are still almost entirely unwritten. And Maria Lucia and Aloria are barely old enough to understand that the world outside their home has opinions about their family. But they will understand it. And when they do, they'll have access to everything. Every court filing, every leaked voicemail, every think piece about their mother's accent and their father's career and the woman who died on a film set the year their sister was born. All of it will be there, waiting. The question isn't whether they'll encounter it. The question is what they'll do with it when they do. And honestly, given everything this family has already been through, the fact that all 8 of these kids appear to be relatively okay, present, functional, loved, is its own kind of story. 8 children. 8 completely different starting points. One name that carries more weight than almost any other in Hollywood right now. Ireland has shown it's possible to carry that weight and still walk forward. The younger ones are just getting started. And the world will be watching when they do.